This episode is brought to you in part by the Apologetics Guy Show, the podcast that helps you find clear answers to tough questions about Christianity. Learn to explain your faith with courage and compassion. Join Moody Bible Institute professor Dr. Mikel Del Rosario at apologeticsguy.com.
Hey everybody, before we get going, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's giving a little bit each month to help me make Truce. It really goes a long way. And right now we're in the midst of a fundraiser to raise an extra $10,000 to help me prepare next season. So far we've only raised about 5% of that goal, but there's plenty of time. And if you'd like to help make Truce more sustainable, visit trucepodcast.com/donate. Even $10 a month goes a long way. And if you give via Patreon, you can get access to literally years worth of bonus materials. Access that at patreon.com/trucepodcast. Again, patreon.com/trucepodcast. Okay, here comes the show. This episode is part of a long series exploring how some evangelicals tied themselves to the Republican Party in the 1970s and 80s. It starts with the episode, What is Biblical? This one can stand on its own, but when you're done, consider going back to the start. This is Bob Jones University versus the United States. Lately, I've been wondering, how do we get people to do what's good for them? We all kind of know things that are beneficial that other people just aren't trying. How can we nudge them in the right direction? So I went out and asked some of my friends for their thoughts. I am here at the Center for the Arts at Jackson, Wyoming, with some of my favorite people in the world, the Laugh Staff, the improv troupe who has, as a group, never been on the show before. A coworker, a child, a spouse, a loved one. How do you motivate them to do something good for themselves?
Put it on a checklist.
Does that work?
I love checklists.
But does it work?
Or if that's too much, get them tickets to a Laugh Staff show.
Oh, right. Yes, and for all the people who are listening, it's our 17th season by the time you're listening to this, so that's very exciting. Yeah.
For us in the future.
Yeah.
To do their job better or to be a better person?
Either one.
Checklist.
What's your favorite recipe? Checklist. What's your favorite book?
It's
Checklist.
been proven to improve the successful surgeries. There's also the reward program. Like, if you do the treadmill, then you can watch your TV program.
Or you could also ask them, what's standing in your way? Is there anything I can help with to help you get closer to that task?
I found that being clear and straightforward with expectations of the final goal seems to work for me. But if I let people know the clear definition of what the end looks like and like a deadline, then that usually helps.
And what is that? A checklist.
It all comes down to... But what if you
Nick just puts one big check at the end.
That's right.
That was fun. Now we know how to compel others to do good stuff. Now let's take what we learned and go a step further. How does a government compel people to make good decisions? One way the United States does that is through tax breaks. That's why there are tax credits for married couples and families. We want to encourage citizens to do stuff that is positive for society, like avoiding divorce. We give tax breaks to conserve land, to organizations that give coats to kids, even to youth sports. Stuff that helps our society keep plugging along. Tax breaks go back, way back. We begin in 1776. No, actually, before. When the U.S. was a series of colonies, tax exemptions for churches began then. Because churches do great services from providing guidance to people to instilling morality and helping communities by serving as gathering places, meeting spots, charity organizers, etc. It wasn't until the 1800s that tax exemptions started for organizations focusing on the poor. Nearing the end of that century, most states gave breaks to religious and educational organizations and those serving the less fortunate. Then, in 1894, Congress exempted others from tax.
Corporations, companies, and associations organized and conducted solely for charitable, religious, or educational purposes.
Which was updated again in 1909, when they gave more specific language for who was exempt.
Religious, charitable, and educational corporations.
Nonprofit corporations, that is. Then in 1913, the 16th Amendment, passed with the help of Republicans, gave Congress the right to impose an income tax. They could do it before that, but the tax had to be apportioned to the states. The language kept getting tinkered with. In 1913, they also gave exemptions to
scientific organizations.
1917,
Exemptions for individuals who give to charity.
1919,
Organizations that deal with cruelty to animals or children.
expanding the definition of who was covered, so that by the time that Bob Jones University ran into trouble with the IRS, the language was something like this, though I've cleaned it up a bit for clarity. This is from Section 501c3 of the tax code.
Corporations and any community chest fund or foundation organized and operated exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, testing for public safety, literary or educational purposes, or to foster national or international amateur sports competition, or for the prevention of cruelty to children or animals.
Finally bringing us to Bob Jones University, a religious school that engaged in segregation, something we as a society should discourage. And how do we do that? We take away tax breaks. This is where our story gets surprisingly nuanced. On its front, this seems like a simple matter of racism, right? The university refused to enroll black students. But the case of Bob Jones University versus the United States was a little more complicated. To quote Columbia Law professor Oladi Johnson, and this is an actor reading the line,
observers often depict the case as a clash of two competing rights, racial equality versus religious free exercise. Yet if these rights find expression in the case, it is through statutory interpretation. The decision is occupied far less with constitutional doctrine than with determining the plain meaning and purpose behind the tax exemption statute and the proper scope of the IRS's power.
This court case has become kind of a myth in evangelical circles, a battle between bigotry and government overreach. Well, that's how we often tell it. But the legal system doesn't always address issues according to our tidy narratives. As far as the courts were concerned, this Bob Jones v. USA case was actually about two different but related items.
The purpose of tax exemption and the scope of the IRS's power.
How could the IRS wield its strength? Could it force organizations, churches, schools, nonprofits to do what it says? Can federal muscle advocate for something good like desegregation? And if so, could it also compel people to do something objectionable? You're listening to the show that uses journalistic tools to look inside the Christian church. We press pause on the culture wars in order to explore how we got here and how we can do better. I'm Chris Staron, and this is Truce. Bob Jones University was named after a real guy. He was born in 1883 and was an evangelist from the age of 14. Bob toured around the South and became a successful, if not one of the most successful preachers of the 1920s. 3 generations of Joneses ran the university. It's in Greenville, South Carolina, and it looks a lot like what you'd expect. Large green quads, a fountain, dormitories, architectural styles swinging from the classical to brutalism. From the beginning, the racism of Bob Jones University was obvious. When President Johnson passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Jones II announced that the university would refuse to admit African Americans. Why? Fears of interracial marriage and dating. Jones gave Alabama's racist governor George Wallace an honorary doctorate that same year. When the litigation started, there were about 5,000 students attending Bob Jones schools from kindergarten through grad school. Jones and others like him resented how the media portrayed them. He hated being written off as a racist, even though he was one. From the start, black students were not permitted to attend. Jones and his team, though, tried to walk a line with semantics. This, in their minds, was not about racism. It was a biblical call to separate the races. According to Professor Johnson, their rationale was this. And again, this is an actor.
Slavery and denial of educational access for blacks were wrong, and born-again Christians of all races could coexist peacefully. Only racial mixing violated the scripture.
Okay, let me find the verse that says that. And I can't, because the Bible does not tell us to separate the races. It was just smoke and mirrors. But the wound of being called racist was every bit as real as the fact that the Joneses were racist, despite their semantics. In November of 1970, the IRS sent the university a letter requesting their admissions policy. In summary, Bob Jones University responded like this.
We're not admitting black students to the school.
And the legal gears started turning. The IRS revoked their tax-exempt status. So the university sued, claiming that the ruling violated their constitutional rights. The First Amendment, free exercise and freedom of association, plus bonus points for due process and equal protection. There were some legal wranglings. The university sued, and the IRS counterclaimed that they were owed back taxes of $490,000. Serious money. The school did change its policy to permit black students to enroll, but it did not allow interracial marriage or dating, and they could oust anyone who advocated for it. All rise! They went before the justice system. The district court found in favor of the university. The case then progressed to the Fourth Circuit Court, where the judge found in favor of the IRS that tax-exempt organizations must operate consistent with public policy. Now, what was federal policy? In short, it prohibited racial discrimination in schools. Finally, the case was accepted by the Supreme Court of the United States in 1981. This proved to be a problem for conservatives. If you remember from my episodes about segregation academies, conservatives ran for office, promising that they would not revoke the tax-exempt status for schools. Now, they had to put their words into action. They took an interesting but not novel approach. Take the issue away from the courts and give it to Congress. They'd made a big stink about this issue. After all, the 1980 Republican Party platform read,
"We will halt the unconstitutional regulatory vendetta launched by Mr. Carter's IRS commissioner against independent schools."
Those who wish to protect private schools, even those explicitly involved in segregation, had an advocate in Ronald Reagan. By the way, the IRS's rules about integration started in the Nixon administration, a Republican administration, but the GOP was unlikely to blame one of their own in their platform. So they pointed a finger at Carter instead. In January of 1982, Reagan's team dropped a news release stating that they would no longer revoke tax-exempt status for
religious, charitable, or scientific organizations on the grounds that they don't conform with certain fundamental public policies,
pushing their idea that only Congress should make such decisions. Reagan submitted a bill to that effect, which to his supporters probably felt like a fulfillment of his campaign promises. He'd stopped the big bad government from interfering with their practices, some of which were racist. The administration argued that it came down to the authority of the IRS. Did they have the power to revoke tax exemptions? Or should that be left up to the House and Senate? As per usual, boring-sounding ideas are key to understanding this moment. This question is a huge part of the story. What are the boundaries of the IRS's power? That's a big question. It's the question of the case. If the IRS could compel people to integrate schools, what else could it do? And this was not some ethereal question. It had real-world implications. Remember that the Bob Jones University case went through lower courts before arriving at the Supreme Court, the District Court, and then the Fourth Circuit Court, which is where something really fascinating happened. According to R.T. McNamara, Reagan's Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, the ruling meant that the IRS not only had the power to force integration, but it could compel tax-exempt organizations to do other stuff as well. What follows are real things that were up for grabs.
Revoking tax-exempt status for women's colleges.
Because men weren't allowed. Therefore, female-only schools were discriminating on the basis of sex.
Requiring that religious institutions ordain women.
Whereas the Bible does not allow for things like the separation of races, it does offer chapters like 1 Timothy 2, stating that women should not teach men. And yes, it's interpreted a bunch of different ways. Churches could, in theory, lose their tax-exempt status if they refuse to ordain women. That's not all. The Fourth Circuit found that the IRS could
deny tax-exempt status for hospitals that provide abortions.
If the cultural pendulum swung in a pro-life direction, then the IRS could revoke a hospital's tax-exempt status. Do you see why the Fourth Court's decision is so interesting? This thing cut both ways. No matter how liberal or conservative you are, you can understand how uneasy this decision was, prompting the following article in Christianity Today. And full disclosure, CT provides ads to this show.
Almost all evangelicals, including fundamentalists, oppose the BJU racial views but hold that the Internal Revenue Service had no right to withhold tax exemption from the university. Churches refusing to ordain women, for example, are now generally looked upon as discriminating against women. The refusal of a church to receive participating homosexuals into membership or to ordain them to the Christian ministry could well be next.
Which probably sounds alarmist, but churches have been sued over the hiring and firing of gay people. Be you left or right, how far does this thing go? Could they force mosques to stop requiring burqas or hijabs, compel black organizations to incorporate whites, Orthodox synagogues to seat men and women together? If the pendulum of public policy swung in a racist direction, could organizations deny membership to a person of color? Where were the boundaries? These are serious questions, but it also makes this era hard to parse. When evangelicals with large followings protested Bob Jones University losing their tax-exempt status, it's easy to say it was just about racism. Again, it was about racism, but it was also about the size and scope of the government. Stuff like this has led a minority of historians like Randall Ballmer to claim that racism was the reason why some evangelicals tied themselves to the GOP, instead of one of many. But that opinion overlooks all the other stuff we've covered this season, and this big question of the episode. What can the government require churches and religious organizations to do? We'll dig even deeper after these messages. While you listen to the ads, why not give a little bit to help me make the show? $10 a month goes a long way. There are lots of avenues for giving on the website at trucepodcast.com/donate. Or you can open Venmo right now and search for @trucepodcast. Okay, here come the ads. Hey friends, can you believe it? I've been working on Truce for almost 8 years. Weekends between shifts driving a school bus and, for the last year, doing this project full time. Thank you so much for your support along the way. I'm reaching out to remind you about a fundraiser I'm doing. I'm continuing the same goal I've had for years, $40,000. With that money, I can afford to finish Season 6 and start work on a very ambitious Season 7. Truce is covering material no other Christian podcast will touch. And it's doing it in an entertaining, intelligent, and researched way you don't see a lot in this market. If you love Truce, now is the perfect time to help out. You can learn how at trucepodcast.com/donate. The link is also in your show notes. That's trucepodcast.com/donate. Thank you for listening, for your prayers, and for your support. Now, let's get back to the show. Welcome back. Today we're looking at the case of Bob Jones University v. the United States. The oral arguments before the Supreme Court were not really about race or the First Amendment. They mostly circled statutes that guide the IRS. The Bob Jones case was heard in conjunction with another similar case involving the Goldsboro Christian School. The lawyer representing them argued about the particular wording in the statute that we covered earlier.
Corporations and any community chest fund or foundation organized and operated exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, testing for public safety, literary or educational purposes, or to foster national or international amateur sports competition, or for the prevention of cruelty to children or animals.
The key word there is or. Or for the prevention of cruelty to children or animals. He argued that the presence of that word meant that an organization didn't have to meet all those requirements, but just one of them. If an org was religious, that was qualification enough. See that? The wording in legal documents is important, right down to the ors and ands. Reading for fun must give lawyers a migraine. The decision came down in May of 1983. The IRS's actions to deny tax exemptions for Bob Jones University did not violate the First Amendment. Their reasoning had to do with common law ideas about the word charity. Organizations were required to provide a public benefit. That
the government's fundamental, overriding interest in eradicating racial discrimination in education substantially outweighs whatever burden denial of tax benefits places on petitioners' exercise of their religious beliefs.
That was the majority opinion. Bob Jones U could not maintain its tax-exempt status and its convictions on interracial relationships. It had to choose one or the other. There was just one dissenting voice among the justices, William Rehnquist. That name may sound familiar. In the second episode on Barry Goldwater, I talked about his history with civil rights. If you'll recall, Goldwater voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964 on the advice of William Rehnquist, who was not yet a Supreme Court judge. As a young clerk for the court, he wrote a memo arguing that Plessy v. Ferguson, the decision that made separate but equal the law of the land, should be upheld. This guy clearly had an opinion on the matter. His minority opinion circled around arguments similar to those made by the lawyers defending the schools. That the language within the statute did not give the IRS the right to challenge organizations if they fit at least one of those criteria in the list. Regardless of Rehnquist, the ruling stood, and the media celebrated the case, with the New York Times writing, "President Reagan and the lawyers he has put in charge of protecting civil rights should stand ashamed." Civil rights groups celebrated. This case had pitted them against the Reagan administration. As Professor Johnson wrote,
in subsequent months, the administration continued to stoke the ire of the civil rights community by opposing school desegregation remedies, affirmative action, regulations to combat housing discrimination, and by replacing members of the United States Civil Rights Commission who were critical of Reagan's civil rights policies.
To his credit, Reagan backed away from his strongest language on the matter and is pledged to support the school, prompting Bob Jones III, the Bob Jones who had earlier invited Reagan to speak there, to denounce the president as a
traitor to God's people.
When it came time for midterm elections, he said defeatedly,
"We couldn't do any worse at the hands of the liberals."
And referring to the Republicans,
"It might be good for us to stay away from the polls and let their ship sink."
On another occasion,
"We're in a bad fix in America when 8 evil old men and 1 vain and foolish woman can speak a verdict on American liberties."
Bob Jones University was slow to repent. Really slow. Jones III said,
"We will never change beliefs that we base on the Word of God."
It bears repeating, their views about separating the races were not based on the Bible. So ultimately, how did the university change? In the year 2000, candidate George W. Bush traveled to Bob Jones University to campaign in South Carolina, drawing criticism from John McCain for being associated with an organization that still disallowed interracial dating in 2000. 1 month later, the school changed their policy. Jones III went on television to announce that students were now free to date as they wished. The university even published an apology. All this just 1 month after George W. Bush was shamed for being there. Political pressure played a key role in their finally doing the right thing. But that didn't stop some evangelicals with large followings from complaining. A bunch of the usual suspects of this season protested the ruling. I won't give you an exhaustive list because we'd be here a long time. Here are some examples. Jerry Falwell called the Supreme Court's decision a blow against religious liberty. The New Right's Paul Weyrich saw the integration of schools as the reason that political operatives like him were able to tie evangelicals to the religious right. Letters poured into the Supreme Court complaining about the case and comparing it to those that ended Bible reading and prescribed prayer in public schools. In short, many in the evangelical world were tone deaf about this case. They saw how removing tax exemptions would hurt their schools. They were concerned about the reach of the federal government, and somehow they missed the real message they were sending, that they were okay aligning themselves with segregation if it covered their butts. To maintain tax exemptions, they made uncomfortable bedfellows. So much of what we covered this season is visible in this case. The long distrust evangelicals have had with the Supreme Court, our slow progress as a society when it comes to racial reconciliation, clashing ideas about the role of women, but also uneasiness when it comes to tolerating people with different ideas, fears about the reach of government. If this show has taught me anything, it's that living in a civilization is complicated. We somehow have to manage a myriad of opinions, lifestyles, ideologies, and social movements, and make laws that serve the public good. And there's likely no perfect system this side of heaven. But we all agree that, on some level, our governments must be able to compel us. Conservatives want to give the government the power to stop abortions. Many libertarians want the government to protect private property. Liberals want to use the power of the federal government to compel people to respect the rights of minorities. Just how far that ability goes is where we disagree. But what we should all agree on is that Christians have no business tying ourselves to racist enterprises, like Falwell, the religious right, and the moral majority did with Bob Jones University. When we do, it shows us a sad part of our humanity, that we've been so obsessed with protecting our tax-exempt status that we've been willing to do some pretty lousy things to preserve it. And that is far from compelling. Special thanks to all my friends who helped me talk through this episode, including Nick and Dave. As usual, I'm about to give you an abbreviated list of my sources. Just know that not every idea in here reflects their opinion, or even mine. I'm indebted to the paper The Story of Bob Jones University via the United States, Race, Religion, and Congress's Extraordinary Acquiescence by Olati Johnson. I tried to get her to talk about her research, but she wrote this paper so long ago that she didn't have time to relearn everything. I also relied on In Search of Another Country by Joseph Crespino and Reaganland by Rick Perlstein. I'm also indebted to the U.S. Senate Historian's Office for sending me the full transcript of the Senate hearings on this matter. They did a wonderful job. They got back to me so fast, and they're a great example of why we need good people in the federal government. A full list of sources is in your show notes and on the website at trucepodcast.com. As per usual, you're welcome to share your thoughts on social media or email them to me at trucepodcast@yahoo.com. While you're on the website, why not consider helping me make this show? I'm doing this project full-time and scraping by financially. If you'd like to buy me a box of tea or some of my beloved baby carrots or pay my rent, visit trucepodcast.com/donate. If you choose to give via Patreon, please give on your PC and not on your iPhone, as Apple is using its power as a monopoly to take 30% of every transaction done in in-app purchases. You're good to go if you sign up for Patreon in a web browser, but not on the iPhone app. The best way to give is by sending a monthly check, so I can avoid credit card fees altogether. Thanks to my friends in the Laugh staff for providing a bit of comedy for the start of the episode. Thanks to everyone who gave me their voices for this episode, including Josh Griffith, Chris Sloan, Jackie Hart, Marcus Watson of the Spiritual Life and Leadership podcast, Dave Monroe, and Bob Stevenson. Truce is a production of Truce Media, LLC. God willing, we'll talk again soon. I'm Chris Starin, and this is Truce.